everyone, I'm Sashah Handal, and this is our latest episode of Alt Baking Bootcamp with Well+Good. Today, we're gonna tackle gluten-free cinnamon rolls. Now, I have nothing against gluten, but sometimes it just doesn't suit everybody's dietary needs. And so we're gonna try this iteration of your favorite holiday breakfast, brunch, midday snack with some gluten-free flours. It's gonna take a little bit of patience and a lot of love, but I promise it'll all be worth it. So not only are these bad boys gluten-free, but they're also vegan. We'll start by making the dough, and then we'll add some filling, and finally we'll make my favorite part, the cashew cream cheese frosting. Yum. I'm gonna take you over to the stovetop so we can begin our dough process. So step one involves a little bit of preparation for your dough. Part of the preparation will take place over the stove, and part of the preparation will take place in your standing mixer. We'll get started with just 3 ingredients that we'll combine in a small pot over the stovetop. So we're gonna start by combining 3 of our ingredients over a medium-low flame. Now, we wanna make sure that it stays at medium-low because we never want these 3 ingredients to boil. Once we have them dissolved and well combined, we're gonna make sure that their internal temperature is not higher than 110 degrees Fahrenheit, which is about the temperature of like a warm bath. I'm gonna start with a cup of alternative milk. Here I'm using almond, and then gluten-free flours can be pretty drying, so I'm adding a half a cup of pumpkin puree. It's not really going to impart much of a pumpkin flavor, but it is gonna give it that added moisture, which lends itself to a very like chewy and dense dough, which is what we're looking for when we get these cinnamon rolls. And then last but not least, we've got some coconut oil. So all we need to do here is just keep it stirring pretty constantly. And the goal is really to melt the coconut oil and reduce down the pumpkin puree. So it would be wise to purchase a thermometer. Like I said before, we want this to be no higher than 110 degrees Fahrenheit. And while you could use your best judgment with your finger, it's not gonna be a consistent judgment overall. Once your puree and your coconut oil are fully melted, dissolved, and stirred together, you can turn off the flame, put it on the back burner, and get ready to combine your dry ingredients. So here, all I've got is a combination of my flours and my leaveners. So here I'm using Bob's 1-to-1. So we're just gonna dump our flour and our leaveners right into our standing mixer. I'm using a hook attachment because essentially I want my dough to end up as a ball. So I'm just going to give it a quick stir. And in the meantime, my liquid ingredients are still tempering. We're just over 125. But the great thing is, I brought my whisk. When you start to move things around, you're bouncing around the heat molecules and all of the heat just dissolves. A little tedious, but if you work quickly and if you have everything you need, then it should be seamless. You can go ahead and add your yeast. We'll whisk again until it's well dissolved, and then we'll let it sit for another 10 minutes so that the yeast can activate. Amazing. So you'll know that your yeast is active when you start to see it foam and bubble, which is exactly what I'm seeing right now. From that point, you want to go ahead and add your coconut sugar, your vanilla, and then just a pinch of salt. So the sugar is also really important when using instant yeast because it feeds the yeast and allows more carbonation, which turns into a higher rise and a more voluminous dough, which is exactly what we want. You'll give it a whisk, make sure the sugar is fully combined and dissolved, and then we'll just give it 1 more minute so that the yeast can feed on the sugar. You'll see even more air bubbles start to rise up, and that's how you know it's working. We're gonna transfer from our pot to our standing mixer. Ta-da! You still got some dry bits, which we can work in, but essentially I'm able to mold this into a ball without it sticking to my hand. But what I'd like to do is create a consistent ball that should be slightly shiny and very smooth to the touch and sticky enough only to stick to itself, but not to my hands. So I'm actually just gonna put it right back into my mixing bowl. Make a mental note or use some painting tape so that you can mark exactly the height of your dough, and when you come back in an hour, you'll know that it has risen when it's past that mark. You can cover this with plastic wrap. I'm just gonna use a kitchen towel, and you wanna leave it somewhere warm so that it allows it to rise. Alrighty, so we've got fully proofed dough. You can see that I've got my gaffing tape here to indicate where the dough started. And while it hasn't doubled in size, it's definitely risen quite a bit. Very gently so as to not ruin all of that aeration that you've just created by letting it rise. We will just roll it right on over onto your cutting board, which I've preset with some parchment paper. I'm just gonna gently press it down, trying to distribute it at the sides. It's not super sticky, but I am just gonna add like a tiny bit of rice flour underneath here to avoid any sticking. Oh no, rice flour avalanche, it's fine. And then we'll do just a tiny bit on top. I'm just gonna start to make a square shape. Something that is pretty uniform on all sides, about 1/4 of an inch thick and smooth on top so that we can add our filling. Now the filling is very, very simple. All I've done is melt some coconut oil, and I have a mixture of coconut sugar and Ceylon cinnamon. So the fancy tools that we will be using are actually not so fancy at all. I've got a silicone brush, and I've got a bench scraper, which next to the mini spatula might just be my favorite kitchen tool. This is a plastic one. It's great for getting things out of bowls. I'm just gonna use that to start to build my square here. And then also pressing down gently, trying to make sure all 4 corners are relatively even. And if they're not, do not fret. I'm gonna use this to start to press it down. Now you wanna move rather quickly, just because the heat of your hand is gonna start to activate all of the stuff going on in our dough. Now I'm gonna brush the coconut oil onto my dough. And then I'm going to very generously sprinkle the coconut sugar mixture on top of that coconut oil. If you're not wanting something super duper sweet, maybe you're gonna have this for breakfast in the morning, then great, you just go with a little bit of a lighter dusting here. But if you're like me and you want all the sweet treats all the time, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, then have at it. Now what we're gonna do is use your parchment paper to start to make our roll. And I'm gonna use my parchment paper to help it over on its side. To avoid any breaking, I'm just gonna guide with the parchment paper, pushing and rolling simultaneously to create that tight seal. And then as I start to work my way down, you may come across some patches of the rice flour, and without being too rough, because you'll see some more breakage in your dough, you can just kind of wipe it off. It doesn't really taste good when it's baked. I've tried it. With the seam side down, I find that it is easiest to cut right in the middle. Ooh, look at that clean. Nothing on the knife. So I'm gonna go for about maybe like 1/2 of an inch, right from the middle, and work my way outwards. I have a very large cast iron that I have already sprayed with a bit of coconut oil. And I like to go all the way out to the sides. Some people don't like the ends, but you know what? They need love too. So we'll just make sure that it's a tight little coil. And I like to start in the middle and then work my way outwards. It's okay if they touch. The rising is done. When you place them into your cast iron, you want them to touch because that will help keep their shape. Another quick drizzle of coconut oil, and that's it. We'll pop it right in. It almost looks like a labyrinth, which is kind of cute. Okay. So your cinnamon rolls are baking, and your house should smell like a Cinnabon in the mall. While that is happening, you can quickly bring together your cashew cream cheese frosting. The options for this are kind of endless and really up to you. The iteration that I'm gonna go with is some maple syrup and some cinnamon because those are my favorite fall combinations. All you need to do is soak some cashews. If you have time, I would soak it overnight, leave it in the fridge, set it and forget it. If you don't have a lot of time and you're making this in a crunch, you can use hot water that you've just boiled to soak your cashews, and it should take no more than 30 minutes to soften them up, and that'll just help you get that creamy texture that's gonna mimic your cream cheese frosting. I've got a cinnamon stick and I've got some dates for texture and a little bit of flavor. So I've been soaking these overnight. I'm just gonna take the jar off and I'm gonna use the flat portion of my lid to drain this excess water out. And then I've got 4 generous tablespoons of maple syrup. I don't know, maybe a tablespoon or 2 of water. I leave my cinnamon stick in, it's been soaking, it's pretty malleable, but if you're using something with a less intense motor, I might take the cinnamon stick out. You can see that the bottom is definitely starting to make a creamy consistency. Now, as it starts to get stuck, that means you need more water. This is looking still a little chunky, so I might let it run on high for another 30 seconds. And while that's happening, I'm gonna go rotate my cinnamon rolls for even heat distribution. Always important. Rotate your baked goods halfway through the bake time. Perfectly smooth and creamy cashew cream cheese frosting. So these are going to be best enjoyed right out of the oven. I've let them cool for maybe 5 to 10 minutes, and they should be relatively easy to pull apart. So I'm gonna take one, dig into my cashew cream cheese frosting, and layer it right on there. I am a frosting fanatic, as one might call it. So we're going to be very generous with this helping. Let's dig in. It's so good. It's so chewy. And the frosting, oh, it's unreal what you can do with cashews. Vegan or not, gluten-free or not, these babies are super satisfying. Thank you so much for watching. If you want the detailed description and recipe, you'll find it in the link below. And in the meantime, you should definitely subscribe to Well+Good. See you next time.